In the vast wilderness, encounters with bears can shift from peaceful to terrifying in an instant. These powerful creatures, driven by hunger or instinct, can turn familiar landscapes into scenes of chaos. In this video, we explore 6 gripping stories that showcase the unpredictable nature of bear attacks on humans. From drone pilots facing deadly encounters in Russia to campers battling for survival in Oregon, we delve into chilling tales of human resilience against one of nature's most formidable predators. Join us as we uncover the harrowing realities of these encounters and the lessons learned from surviving them. Igor had been a drone pilot for more than a decade, specializing in wildlife surveys and filming rare animals in remote regions. His passion for technology and nature merged in this challenging work, flying advanced drones over vast wilderness areas to capture elusive creatures on camera. On May 18, 2025, deep in the dense forests of Russia's Ussuri Krai, Igor and his assistant Pavel were engaged in their most ambitious project yet, documenting the behavior of the region's grizzly bears, known for their size and aggression. Igor, in his early 40s, was lean and weathered from years spent outdoors. Pavel, a few years younger, was a sharp and cautious observer, responsible for ground support and safety. The two men shared a quiet respect for the wild, fully aware of the risks involved, but committed to collecting valuable data. Their equipment was state-of-the-art. The drone alone had cost Igor a staggering $50,000, an investment justified by the potential scientific value. Over the years, they had tracked elusive wolves, rare leopards, and migratory birds across unforgiving terrain. But this assignment carried unique danger. Grizzlies were unpredictable and territorial, and the dense vegetation offered little visibility or protection. Still, the potential rewards, a detailed study of an apex predator's behavior in its natural habitat, were too great to pass up. That morning, the sky was overcast with heavy clouds, and the air smelled fresh and cold, carrying the scent of pine and damp earth. They had set up near a wide riverbank where a large male grizzly had been spotted feeding. The massive bear stood nearly 10 feet tall when upright, its broad shoulders and powerful muscles unmistakable even from a distance. Igor adjusted the drone's controls, fine-tuning the camera to zoom in without disturbing the animal. Pavel stationed himself about 20 meters away, keeping watch over both the bear and Igor. They had agreed on a strict safety protocol. Never approach the bear on foot, keep the drone at a safe altitude, and remain ready to retreat at the first sign of aggression. For hours, the bear remained preoccupied, tearing into salmon carcasses along the shore and occasionally sniffing the air. Igor slowly launched the drone. It buzzed quietly as it rose and moved steadily toward the bear. From Pavel's position, he watched the drone maneuver with practiced precision, maintaining a safe but close distance. Igor controlled it with ease, his focus fixed on the screen as the drone captured the bear's every move. Without warning, the bear's ears twitched, and it locked eyes with the hovering machine. For a moment, it remained still, muscles taut beneath thick fur. Then, with a sudden roar, it charged toward the airborne intruder. The drone jolted midair as the signal flickered. Igor struggled to regain control. As the bear bolted toward the tree line, Pavel realized it was headed straight for Igor. The drone dipped in altitude while Igor worked frantically to pull it back. Realizing the danger, Igor turned to run, his boots sinking into the muddy ground. His breath came in gasps, adrenaline surging, but the bear closed the distance quickly, crashing through the underbrush with devastating speed and power. Pavel tried to call out, but the moment had already turned deadly. The bear struck with terrifying force. Igor was knocked to the ground, his clothing and body torn by the animal's powerful claws. His attempts to defend himself were no match for the sheer strength of the predator. Pavel, frozen in place for a few seconds, could only watch in horror as the violent encounter unfolded just meters away. The sounds of the attack echoed through the forest, raw, primal, and merciless. The bear continued its assault until Igor's movement slowed, then ceased altogether beneath the predator's crushing weight. It was a grim and brutal end, a stark reminder of the wild's unforgiving nature. Nearby, the drone hovered briefly before the bear turned its rage on it. With 2 swift swipes, the animal destroyed the machine, sending shards of metal and plastic scattering across the forest floor. The advanced technology, a marvel of modern engineering, now lay broken and useless among the twigs and moss. Pavel's mind raced. Terrified for Igor and overwhelmed by the chaos, he knew he had to act. He ran through the forest, pushing toward the nearest ranger station several kilometers away. Driven by panic, he pushed through exhaustion, branches scraping his face and legs burning with each step. Eventually, he reached the station and alerted search teams. A group of rangers armed with rifles, radios, and medical kits followed him back into the forest. The trail felt quiet and heavy on their return. Only rustling leaves and the distant sound of the river broke the silence. They found Igor's body in a clearing, torn and lifeless. The severity of the injuries left no doubt that survival had been impossible. Nearby, the shattered drone lay in fragments, a grim reminder of what had occurred. The incident shocked the scientific and drone communities. Experts raised urgent concerns about the risks of operating unmanned aircraft near apex predators. Calls for stricter regulations and improved safety protocols quickly followed. The wilderness, once again, had delivered a harsh lesson on the dangers it held. In the days that followed, Pavel grappled with grief and survivor's guilt. He had witnessed the unthinkable and led rescuers back to the scene, but the loss of his colleague left a deep and lasting scar. The forest, once filled with wonder and possibility, now felt cold and merciless. Despite the pain, Pavel made a vow to honor Igor's legacy by improving safety standards and educating others about the real risks of wild encounters. Igor's passion for merging technology with nature had been inspiring, but the cost had been immense. The pursuit of knowledge, Pavel now understood, often came with staggering consequences. News of the tragedy spread far beyond the region, serving as a somber warning to drone operators, explorers, and wildlife enthusiasts worldwide. No device, regardless of its sophistication, could replace the respect and caution demanded by nature's most dangerous creatures. The bear's attack became an enduring symbol of the wild's raw power, one that Pavel and many others would never forget. Tom had driven logging trucks through the remote northern wilderness for nearly 20 years. Rough, steady, and as tough as the landscape itself, he was no stranger to the dangers of hauling massive loads through isolated forest roads. On May 22, 2025, he found himself deep in the wilds of an island where nature still ruled and humans tread lightly. The region was known for its dense berry patches, a critical food source for the island's massive native bears, immense, powerful creatures with reputations as unpredictable as the shifting weather. Tom was in his mid-40s, broad-shouldered and weather-beaten, with a calm demeanor forged by decades on the road. That afternoon, his logging truck rumbled along a narrow, gravel-lined path cutting through thick spruce and alder. The engine had been acting up all morning, sputtering and coughing as if struggling to breathe. Suddenly, just as he rounded a sharp bend, the engine died completely. The truck rolled to a stop beside a lush patch of ripe berries. The silence that followed was thick, broken only by distant bird calls and the faint rustle of wind in the trees. Frustrated, Tom shut off the ignition and climbed down from the cab. His boots sank slightly into the soft, mossy ground as he approached the hood, intent on diagnosing the problem. The engine hissed faintly as it cooled, and Tom reached for his toolbox, scanning his surroundings. The berry patch stretched several yards, the bushes heavy with dark purple fruit. He was aware these berries attracted bears, but he hadn't seen any fresh tracks or signs nearby. Unbeknownst to him, a massive bear was feeding just 20 meters away. Its thick fur shimmered in the dappled light, and its enormous shoulders hunched as it tore handfuls of berries with powerful jaws. The animal was a giant, easily standing 8 feet tall when upright, with curved claws and eyes filled with fierce intelligence. It appeared absorbed in its meal and seemingly unaware of Tom's presence. Tom worked quickly, checking hoses and wires under the hood. Then the atmosphere changed. The bird calls ceased, and a heavy silence settled over the forest. A chill ran down his spine as unease crept into his chest. Moments later, the bear's head rose sharply, its eyes locking on Tom. For a heartbeat, the world stood still. The bear rose to its full height with terrifying speed, unleashing a guttural growl that echoed like thunder through the trees. Tom froze, heart pounding. He barely had time to react before the massive creature charged, its powerful limbs thundering against the earth. Tom stumbled backward, but the bear closed the distance with frightening speed. With a violent swipe, it knocked him off his feet, sending him crashing to the ground beside the truck. Pain tore through his leg as claws shredded both fabric and flesh. The animal's teeth sank into his calf with crushing force. Driven by sheer survival instinct, Tom crawled desperately toward the truck's door. Every movement was agony, and blood blurred his vision. Still, he managed to grip the door handle and wrench it open just as the bear prepared to strike again. He slammed the door shut and locked it, gasping for breath as the truck's frame became his only shield. Outside, the bear circled the vehicle, pounding the metal with massive paws. The noise shook the cab and rattled Tom's nerves. It growled low, its breath steaming in the cool air. After circling once more, the bear eventually turned and lumbered away into the thick forest, leaving Tom bloodied but alive. Time passed slowly as Tom sat trembling, fighting the pain and trying to stay alert. He reached for his radio and called for help, his voice weak but steady. Within the hour, a rescue team arrived, and he was airlifted by helicopter to the nearest hospital. Doctors found deep wounds, torn muscle, and crushed bone in his left leg. He would survive, but the road to recovery would be long. The attack left more than physical wounds. Tom's experience drew attention to the growing conflict between human industry and native wildlife habitats in isolated regions. As logging operations pushed deeper into once untouched forests, encounters with large predators had become more frequent and far less predictable. Wildlife experts pointed to the incident as evidence of a broader ecological issue. Animals that once roamed vast, undisturbed territories were now forced into shrinking habitats, their food sources increasingly shared with or disrupted by humans. The berry patches, once peaceful feeding grounds, were now flashpoints of conflict between industry and nature. Tom's experience was a stark example of how sudden and violent the response from the wild could be when provoked by human encroachment. In the weeks following the incident, the logging company implemented new safety protocols, including mandatory wildlife awareness training. Tom, once just a driver, became an advocate for education and coexistence. He began sharing his story in meetings and interviews, urging both workers and decision-makers to take bear behavior and habitat preservation seriously. Though his body healed slowly, his outlook on the wilderness changed more profoundly. Tom never blamed the bear. He recognized it as a territorial animal reacting to intrusion, not as a villain. The incident revealed how thin and fragile the line was between civilization and the untamed world. One misstep could turn a routine day into a life-threatening encounter. As Tom recovered, he gained a deeper sense of humility and caution. The logging truck that had nearly become his coffin was eventually repaired and returned to service. Still, the memory of that day lingered, the moment when the forest reminded him of its power. The bear had shown him the unforgiving strength of the wild, and Tom had survived to share that truth. Survival in these lands required respect, not just preparation. Alex had long been drawn to the remote wilderness of the northern mountain ranges. A passionate angler and outdoorsman who sought solitude and the thrill of isolated fishing trips. In his early 30s, lean and experienced, he was no stranger to the risks of the wild, always approaching it with careful respect, honed over years of outdoor living. On May 30th, 2025, he camped beside a wide, slow-moving river deep in the rugged backcountry, an area well known for frequent grizzly bear activity. The air carried a crisp morning chill, and the forest around him whispered with the sounds of awakening wildlife. The previous evening had been peaceful. He spent hours casting along the river's edge, the steady flow of water and distant birdsong easing his mind. At dawn, he packed his gear and prepared to explore farther upstream, unaware that danger lay much closer than expected. The region was a known denning and feeding ground for grizzlies, including a female with cubs recently reported by wildlife officials. But Alex's thoughts were on the water, focused more on fishing opportunities than the unseen hazards nearby. As sunlight filtered through the dense canopy, he moved quietly through the underbrush. The damp earth beneath his boots felt soft and uneven, scattered with pine needles and decaying leaves. His backpack carried fishing rods, tackle, and basic camping supplies, while his hands gripped a small cooler with bait. The steady murmur of the river grew louder with each step. Hidden just off the trail, a large female grizzly rested in a shallow den, camouflaged by fallen branches and thick undergrowth. Two cubs, nearly a year old but already sizable, lay beside her, their small bodies rising and falling with each breath. Though appearing at ease, the sow remained alert, her senses finely tuned to any potential threat. Her maternal instincts were fierce, an ingrained readiness to defend her young with overwhelming force. Alex continued his careful approach to the riverbank, setting his sights on a promising new fishing spot. He failed to notice the subtle signs, broken twigs, disturbed earth, that hinted at the bear's presence. The stillness of the morning masked the tension in the forest. Then, with no visible trigger, the grizzly charged. The roar that followed shattered the calm, a raw, primal cry of defense and aggression. Alex froze for a split second, adrenaline surging through him. The suddenness of the encounter left no room to escape. He dropped his gear instinctively, the cooler and rods crashing to the ground as he tried to back away. With terrifying speed, the bear closed the gap. He raised his hands in an effort to appear non-threatening, but it was too late. The sow reached him in moments, her powerful jaws locking onto his right leg. Pain exploded instantly, sharp, blinding, and deep, as teeth tore into flesh and bone. The force of the impact hurled him to the ground, his body colliding with rocks and dirt. Driven by instinct, Alex grasped a thick branch from the ground and struck at the bear with everything he had. He pounded at its head and shoulders, fueled by fear and desperation. His shouts rang out through the trees, echoing against the trunks with raw intensity. Startled by the resistance, the bear hesitated. For a brief moment, its growls softened, and its eyes darted between Alex and the makeshift weapon in his hand. After a pause that seemed to stretch forever, the bear turned slowly and backed into the forest, disappearing with her cubs into the thick brush. Alex lay gasping, blood pooling around him, his body racked with pain and exhaustion. His leg was severely injured, torn, fractured, and bruised, but he was conscious, and he was alive. Summoning every ounce of remaining strength, he began crawling back to camp. Each movement was excruciating, but the will to survive pushed him forward. Eventually, he reached his campsite, dragging himself to his emergency signal device and activating it. Every noise in the forest kept him alert as he waited, unsure if the bear would return. Within an hour, a rescue helicopter arrived, and he was transported to a trauma facility. Doctors performed multiple surgeries to repair the extensive injuries to his leg. Over the following weeks, he endured pain, infections, and slow physical therapy sessions. The journey to recovery was grueling, but his determination remained unshaken. The incident served as a stark reminder of how unpredictable bear encounters could be, especially when cubs were involved. Wildlife experts emphasized the danger of surprising a mother bear, noting that even seasoned outdoorsmen could become victims of territorial aggression. Alex's ordeal became a cautionary tale, a vivid example of why vigilance and preparedness are essential in bear country. In the months that followed, Alex spent time reflecting on the incident with a deeper understanding. Years of wilderness experience had taught him many lessons, but this one came with a steep cost. He came to accept how narrow the margin for error could be in the wild. Respect, awareness, and humility were no longer just principles, they were survival tools. His physical scars would last, but Alex's spirit remained intact. The grizzly's charge was both a terrifying ordeal and a transformative moment. It strengthened his resolve to educate others about the realities of venturing into predator-rich habitats. He began speaking about his story, urging fellow adventurers to learn from his experience and never underestimate the raw power of nature. Back in the forest, the rhythms of wildlife resumed. The mother bear and her cubs moved on, their presence marked by the lasting imprint they had left on one human life. For Alex, the path forward was shaped by pain, resilience, and a renewed commitment to coexist with the wild, not as its conqueror, but as a respectful visitor who had faced its fury and survived. Ethan was a wildlife photographer driven by passion and patience. In his late 20s, with sharp eyes behind a camera and a quiet, determined nature, he pursued moments few ever witnessed. Images of Kodiak bears in their prime, feeding along the salmon-rich streams of Alaska's remote island wilderness. On May 15, 1995, he and his guide, Mark, ventured deep into the dense terrain of Kodiak Island, intent on capturing the early salmon run and the bears that followed it. Mark, a seasoned outdoorsman in his early 40s, knew the island well. He was familiar with its unforgiving terrain and the unpredictable behavior of its massive bears. His years in the wild had taught him caution and respect, lessons he tried to pass on to Ethan, reminding him that in bear country, the line between observer and intruder could vanish in an instant. The two men moved carefully, navigating through thick forest and over rocky ridges, following the path of salmon upstream. On their second day, they found a promising spot along a swift-moving river, where the water churned red with spawning fish. The air was damp and cool, heavy with the scent of wet earth and pine. Ethan, eager to find the perfect angle, ventured ahead alone, camera in hand, eyes scanning the shoreline for a glimpse of bear activity. Unbeknownst to him, a dominant male Kodiak bear was already nearby, massive, battle-scarred, and watching. The bear lay low among the brush, keenly aware of its surroundings. It was the undisputed ruler of this stretch of river, and anything unfamiliar in its territory could be perceived as a threat. Earlier that morning, Ethan had flown a drone to scout the riverbank, looking for prime vantage points. The buzzing machine had flown low, skimming the treetops and disturbing the natural quiet. The noise had unsettled the bear, stirring unease and irritation. Though it hadn't reacted immediately, the intrusion had left a mark, a rising tension beneath its calm. As Ethan moved unknowingly downwind of the bear, he advanced too quickly and too close. The uneven terrain, a tangle of moss-covered rocks and fallen branches, made it difficult to remain silent or to retreat easily. From his position farther back, Mark noticed the shift in the bear's posture and shouted a warning, but his voice was muffled by the roar of the river and the thick foliage. Then, the bear charged. Its speed was terrifying. In seconds, it covered the short distance between itself and Ethan, who had just registered movement in the brush when the bear was upon him. He dropped his camera and turned to flee, but the rough ground slowed him, his boots slipping on the wet earth. The bear reached him in moments. Its massive jaws clamped around Ethan's torso with staggering force, driving him to the ground. The silence of the wilderness shattered with the sound of breaking branches and the muffled impact of the struggle. Ethan fought, scrambling and twisting, but the bear's strength was overwhelming. It bit and struck with primal fury, likely reacting not just to his presence, but to the earlier disturbance caused by the drone. Mark sprinted toward the scene, heart pounding, radio in hand. He saw the bear pause, momentarily distracted by Mark's sudden approach, then vanish into the forest, slipping into the shadows as quickly as it had appeared. Mark reached Ethan's side and radioed for rescue, describing the attack and their location with urgent precision. Hours passed before teams arrived, navigating dense brush and uneven ground to reach them. When they finally did, they found Ethan gravely injured, motionless among the branches and blood-stained soil. Despite their efforts, he had not survived. The tragedy left an impact far beyond the isolated riverbank. Investigators later concluded that the drone had agitated the bear earlier in the day, contributing to its heightened aggression. Wildlife experts pointed to the incident as a stark warning. In wilderness areas, especially during critical feeding periods, small disturbances can have unpredictable and deadly consequences. The story made waves within both the wildlife photography community and the broader public. It reignited debate around the use of drones in natural habitats and led to renewed calls for stricter guidelines and education for those working in close proximity to large predators. Mark carried the weight of the experience long after the forest fell silent again. Ethan had been more than just a client. He was a young man fueled by awe and creativity, chasing beauty in its rawest form. The photo he had hoped to capture would never exist, replaced instead by the memory of a life cut short in the pursuit of it. The attack became a solemn lesson in the fragile balance between humanity and the wild. Kodiak Island, with its rugged beauty and enormous bears, was not a place for careless movements or unfamiliar technology. It demanded respect, always. In time, a memorial was quietly placed near the river's edge, where salmon still swam and bears still roamed. It served as a quiet reminder of Ethan's passion, his final journey, and the enduring truth that in places untouched by roads or fences, nature's rules are absolute and unforgiving. Leah and Jason had spent years dreaming of escaping the relentless pace of city life for the quiet refuge of Oregon's vast, untamed forests. Both in their late 20s, they were skilled campers who prided themselves on their knowledge of wilderness safety and their deep respect for nature. On a clear, cool summer evening in early July 2025, they found themselves deep in the Cascade Mountain Range, far from any roads or trails, surrounded by towering fir trees and dense brush that blanketed the forest floor. The couple had carefully selected a small clearing to set up camp. They pitched their tent beneath the canopy of ancient evergreens, adhering strictly to established safety practices, particularly those concerning food storage. Their backpacks, heavy with supplies, were suspended from a sturdy branch well away from the sleeping area to reduce the risk of attracting wildlife. They had read numerous warnings about black bears in the area and were well aware of how easily one misstep could turn into a life-threatening situation. After a long day spent hiking along narrow, mossy paths beside rushing streams, Leah and Jason built a campfire to warm themselves and prepare dinner. The forest was already deep in shadow, with darkness settling over the trees. Birdsong faded into the rhythmic crackling of firewood, accompanied only by the occasional rustling of leaves stirred by the evening wind. Leah handled the meal preparation, carefully frying meat and vegetables in a small, greasy pan over a portable stove placed near the fire pit. The savory aroma mingled with the smoky scent of the fire, saturating the cool air around the campsite. Jason sat on a nearby log, peeling an orange and quietly observing the interplay of flame and shadow in the surrounding woods, content in the tranquil stillness. Then a subtle movement caught Leah's attention. Beyond the reach of the firelight, a shadow shifted quietly in the brush. Her breath hitched as she recognized the unmistakable silhouette of a black bear stepping from the undergrowth, its dark fur blending almost perfectly with the twilight. The animal moved slowly but with intent, clearly drawn by the smell of cooking food. Leah remained motionless, still holding the pan. Jason, too, had noticed the bear and watched intently as it crept forward, sniffing the air. The bear's eyes glinted faintly in the firelight, curious but wary. Both campers understood that the animal knew they were there, but hadn't yet decided whether to continue its approach or flee. Every second stretched out as the bear inched closer, its nose twitching at the scent of hot oil and meat. Leah held her breath, signaling to Jason to stay perfectly still. They both knew that sudden movement or loud noise might provoke an attack, and now, frozen in place, they silently hoped the bear would turn back. But then, a mishap shattered the stillness. Leah's grip faltered and the greasy pan slipped from her hands, clattering loudly onto the ground and spilling hot oil near the fire pit. The sudden sizzle was sharp and startling. Flames flared upward, catching the oil and sending a burst of sparks into the dry leaves around them. The bear reacted immediately. Instead of fleeing, it lunged toward the spilled food in a frenzy, toppling the fire pit in its rush. Flames burst outward and embers flew as the fire spread, fueled by oil and kindling. In an instant, chaos erupted. Jason sprang to his feet, adrenaline flooding his system. His thoughts raced. There was now danger from both the fire and the now agitated bear. The animal's form grew larger and more aggressive as it advanced. Its heavy muscles rippled under thick fur, and then it struck. Leah was caught by the bear's powerful swipe. Claws tore through her pants and sliced into her leg, leaving deep, ragged wounds. The force of the blow sent her stumbling backward, shock and pain rendering her momentarily unable to react. Jason, acting on instinct, grabbed a metal cooking pot and began smashing it against a nearby rock. He raised his voice in a series of sharp, commanding bursts, striking the pot repeatedly to create a harsh, disorienting noise meant to drive the bear away. Every moment hung in suspense as the bear paused, uncertain. The animal glanced between the flaring fire and Jason's loud disruption. Then suddenly it turned and bolted back into the forest, vanishing into the darkness and leaving behind a trail of broken brush and scattered debris. Jason rushed to Leah's side, his pulse hammering in his ears. Blood seeped from the deep gashes on her leg, staining the forest floor. Tearing fabric from his shirt, he quickly fashioned a crude bandage and wrapped it tightly around her thigh to control the bleeding. Leah gritted her teeth and braced herself against the pain, her body trembling with each shallow breath. Though injured and shaken, Leah stayed alert while Jason helped her prepare for the hike out. They knew they needed medical attention fast. Carefully, they extinguished the fire remnants, pouring water over the smoldering coals to prevent further spread. Their journey back through the forest was slow and tense. Every crack of a branch, every rustle in the trees set their nerves on edge. The wilderness, once a place of peace and serenity, now felt ominous, but they pressed on, driven by the will to survive. Eventually, they reached a ranger station several miles away. Emergency responders were already mobilizing. Leah was quickly transported by air to the nearest hospital, where doctors worked to stabilize and treat her injuries. Her wounds were serious and required multiple surgeries, but thanks to her resilience and Jason's rapid response, permanent damage was avoided. The incident soon became a widely shared story within the outdoor community, underscoring the delicate balance between humans and wildlife in Oregon's wilderness. Officials pointed to the event as a reminder of how quickly things could spiral out of control, from a dropped pan to a life-threatening encounter. They emphasized the importance of rigorous food safety protocols, proper fire handling, and calm decision-making during wildlife interactions. Leah and Jason's experience became a cautionary tale, recounted by hikers, campers, and nature lovers as a testament to both the dangers of the backcountry and the importance of preparation. Though Leah carried physical scars from that night, she and Jason emerged with a deeper bond forged through survival. The forest remained a place of profound beauty, but now it also held a darker memory of a night when danger came too close, and only calm minds and quick action made the difference between life and tragedy. Emma was a scientist who had devoted her life to studying the Arctic's fragile ecosystem. At 34, she was no stranger to harsh conditions and isolation, having spent years conducting fieldwork in some of the most remote parts of the world. Driven by a fierce passion to understand how climate change was reshaping this frozen wilderness, she set out alone in mid-July 2025 on an expedition deep into the Arctic tundra, hundreds of miles from any human settlement. That day, the weather shifted suddenly and violently. A rare summer storm rolled in, sweeping across the tundra with fierce winds that bent the sparse grasses and whipped ice patches into slick hazards. Heavy gray clouds obscured the sun, and a sharp chill settled into the air. unusual for the brief Arctic summer. Despite the deteriorating weather, Emma pressed on. She had a clear goal: reach an old Inuit cabin marked on her map, a small shelter she hoped would provide refuge from the storm, and a base to conduct her research. The cabin stood weathered and worn, its wooden frame bleached by years of sun, snow, and wind. The windows were dark, some cracked, the door heavy but intact. Emma hurried inside, pulling the door shut behind her and securing it with a sturdy bolt she found inside. The shelter was cold and musty, smelling faintly of old wood, ice, and a forgotten past. She set down her gear and tried to steady her breath, thankful for the shelter from the sudden downpour that had started outside. Unbeknownst to Emma, she was not alone. A massive polar bear had been moving nearby. It had been following the scent of a seal carcass frozen just a few hundred meters from the cabin. The bear's hunger was desperate. For days, the shrinking sea ice had pushed it farther inland, away from its traditional hunting grounds. Its keen nose picked up Emma's scent and traced it to the cabin. Driven by hunger and curiosity, the bear approached silently, moving with terrifying purpose through the whipping wind and rain. Inside the cramped cabin, Emma was unaware of the approaching danger. She checked her equipment, preparing to gather data the next morning. Suddenly, the quiet was shattered by a violent crash. The side window exploded inward with a deafening crash of shattering glass. Sharp shards flew through the air like deadly rain as the bear's enormous paw smashed through the opening. Emma's heart jumped into her throat as she scrambled backward, clutching the flare gun she always carried for emergencies. The bear swiped again, powerful muscles flexing as it battered the cabin's walls and door. The wooden frame shook with each blow, splinters raining down around her. She was trapped inside, the storm outside forgotten in the terrifying immediacy of the bear's presence. The bear circled the cabin, growling low and fierce, its hot breath steaming in the cold air. Emma crouched low, every nerve screaming with fear and adrenaline. She gripped the flare gun tightly, her arms trembling. The bear's weight and fury tested the walls, swiping violently through the shattered window. On one swipe, broken glass sliced into Emma's arm, sharp pain exploding as blood welled quickly. Minutes dragged torturously. Emma's breath came in shallow gasps, her mind racing. The storm's howl mingled with the bear's guttural roars and the violent thuds against the cabin. Her arm throbbed, a burning ache, but the flare gun remained her only hope. Then, summoning every ounce of courage, she raised the flare gun and fired a blazing projectile into the ceiling. The sudden burst of light and fire ignited a patch of old wood and dry debris. Sparks flew wildly, smoke billowed thick and choking. The bear recoiled, startled by the unexpected inferno, its growls turning to confused snarls as it took a hesitant step back. Seizing the moment, Emma backed toward the window, eyes darting for an escape or rescue. Outside, the storm still raged, but faint sounds of distant voices and flashlights pierced the darkness. Hours earlier, her camp's satellite signal had triggered an alert, prompting a search team to deploy in the severe weather. The bear, confused and wary of the fire, eventually retreated into the storm shadows. Emma collapsed near the door, exhausted, bleeding, but alive. The rescue team arrived moments later, moving carefully with tranquilizer guns and first aid. They found the cabin battered, the walls clawed and blood-stained, shards of glass everywhere. Emma was airlifted to a distant field hospital. Her arm was treated for deep lacerations and shock. Despite the trauma, she survived. Her survival was a testament to her quick thinking, resilience, and the flare gun's crucial role. Her ordeal underscored a stark and growing reality. Climate change was rapidly transforming the Arctic landscape, melting sea ice and shrinking polar bear hunting grounds. As their natural food sources disappeared, bears were forced closer to human settlements and shelters, increasing the frequency of unpredictable and dangerous encounters. Emma's harrowing experience became a chilling example of this new reality. It revealed how these apex predators, pushed by hunger and desperation, could become aggressive in ways previously rare or unseen. It was a warning to scientists, explorers, and residents alike. Human presence in the Arctic wilderness now carried more risk than ever before. The balance between man and wild was shifting. The old separations that had kept humans and polar bears apart were eroding under the relentless advance of climate change. Emma's attack was not an isolated event, but part of a troubling pattern of closer, more volatile contact between species struggling to survive. As she recovered, Emma knew her research would have to adapt. Studying the Arctic now meant more than tracking melting ice and declining seal populations. It meant understanding the human-wildlife conflicts intensifying in the tundra's changing face. The storm that had forced her into the cabin, The bear that had shattered the window, and the flare that had saved her life, all were pieces of a story far bigger than one person's struggle. They were signs of a planet in flux, a wilderness in crisis, and the dangerous new frontier of survival in a warming world.